Opposing Gloves here, and this is another video in the Harmor from the Ground Up tutorial series. And today we're going to be looking at the phaser, and the phaser does all sorts of nifty cool things. I have lots of videos about phasers on my channel. Go look up phasers. There's different kinds. I'm currently trying to learn how to program my own stuff, and so phasers is an interesting subject because there's so many sort of ways to do it. But this one is an additive phaser. What does that mean? Well, normally a phaser will take your signal. Well, this is one version of a phaser. You take your signal, send it through an all-pass filter, which is just a special filter that phase inverts only a particular portion of your frequency spectrum, and it does that moving up through your spectrum or down through your spectrum depending on how your phaser has been set up, and it will fade out that signal. However, this one gives you control over each individual harmonic, so you can create particular textures and resonances. If you can't tell by now, all of synthesis is basically just turning volume up and down in very specific ways, and a phaser is another sort of workflow method to do this. So right now I have the phaser, and if we turn it on with the mix knob that just controls the amount, as you see, it moves up through our spectrum. We can control how fast this movement is using the speed. And you can see we can reverse direction, so that's a cool option. So now we have width. So let's say we want, so you can see it's creating holes in our spectrum. If that wasn't clear before, it creates holes in our spectrum. Maybe you're newer at this. So we have this width that will change how big that hole is. It can also affect how much room you have for how many lines of all pass you want to go through. Width can do some really interesting things, especially depending on the shape of your phaser. So I'm just going to keep width right in the middle so we have something consistent to look at as we discover more about phasers. We have this offset. It just changes. Now this is an infinitely spinning wheel. So let's say you've got your sound going, but you want to create some cool rhythmic passages or whatever. You could do it using an LFO to your offset. If that's too advanced for you, you could just move your offset while you're playing and just kind of see what it does. Sort of like a speed control. Ideally, if you get it at the right rate, you could even create a straight line. So that's really cool. They have all these options. You have octave, hertz, and harmonic. These are all different weighting options for how you want the phaser to interact with your frequency content. So octave is a weighted logarithmic. We have hertz, which is linear, and then we have harmonic. It moves in multiples, so it's harmonically related to your fundamental, which could create, as you can see, we get sort of a square wave tone from this, but not quite all the way. So just some interesting options you have available to you. I'm going to leave it in octave mode. And you have this KBT, which stands for keyboard tracking. This is supposed to, okay, so with phasers that, I haven't made, I have to go read the manual so I make sure I have my information straight. And this one says keyboard tracking controls the amount. However, there is no amount knob. So I thought reasonably that this should control the mix. So if you're not familiar with keyboard tracking links an effect to your keyboard so that higher notes are more or less affected than lower notes. So this could be a cool effect. If I have a whole thing in my massive series on this. But this isn't what this was doing. For example, here's a low note. And we'll turn keyboard tracking all the way to the left. So 200%. And if it controls our mix, which it doesn't, see it stays the same. If we move it over, it stays the same. No difference. And with a phaser, it can be tricky making comparisons like this because you have these holes moving through your content. And as a result, you might get very different textures, and you might think it's your keyboard tracking when in reality it's just your phaser doing its job. So, but what I have found is why you move it while playing. Is it basically acts like a really fast offset knob. So if anyone knows more about this, because there is no amount or whatever. So that was just an interesting thing that I discovered. If you want to automate this instead, because I found it had no difference. Because if we play some low notes and then we go up and play some high notes, the same level of removal is taking place. Now I have this in octave mode. If we move it to hertz mode, it changes the harmonics to fit the screen, so that might be a little misleading. But here we have that, and we go down a few, and we have this. So about the same amount of removal. So the keyboard tracking. Oh well, I should probably turn it on to say something like this. So here's a low note, and here's a high note. As you can see, the demonstration sounds identical to the one where it was off, and this just further says what I say is I'd like to know more exactly what this does, but that's a use for it, I guess, if you want to use it. We have all these different shapes available to us, similar to the resonance options, how we can change the shape of our resonance. We could change the shape of our phaser. So we have classic as your classic phaser. We have a triangle mode, has a little bit of a sharper curve. We have eggs, which has very small. So anyways, as you can see, you can mess with these. And some of these are huge, and they look like you've bandpassed your signal several times. Well, it's just a phaser. So that's kind of cool. You can use these to create some really interesting textures that you can control. Imagine automating this with several other parameters. You'd get some pretty neat effects. We have twins, and you can mess with the rest. I happen to be a fan of box. I like that one for some reason. Now we have this. This is going to take... Okay, so first we should talk about the phaser shape, because we have a special mode for frequency, and that's like nuts. So first we have this phaser shape. So here is our shape. It has... This determines the shape of the hole, essentially, we're making in our sound. And we could change that to be something like this. As you see, we get this very rigid, sort of stair-steppy shape, only because this is a harmonic thing. But we can change it to do something more like this, make it a very tight hole, or a very huge hole, I mean. And we could do the exact opposite, and to do that, we would simply do this, and do this. As you can see, we've been given extreme control over what shape our phaser makes over time. And so now we have this thing. It's called frequency mode. And I'm going to move this all up to the top. The first demonstration is going to do nothing to our sound. So if we do frequency mode, it stays exactly the same. Now, what this does is it no longer creates a hole in your sound. It links the phaser control. So the fact that it moves up in pitch through your spectrum, it will now apply pitch bend changes to your spectrum in a particular area of your spectrum. So this is like crazy. So as we, like, for example, we'll move this down, get rid of this, and we'll create a hole, something like that. You'll see a pitch bend movement move up through our spectrum. Or a whole, well, we have a whole bunch of measurements. We'll take the width down. So as you can see, we have some very interesting options here, and we can create shapes for this. So it's like, whoa, I feel like I'm doing like multivariable calculus or something. It's just nuts. So there's a whole load of implications with this. You can create all sorts of interesting timbres. This could be interesting as a pad effect. If you want to create some atmospheric backgrounds, you could really randomize your pitch and create some interesting things. Or you could do something as simple as just simply moving one little thing just a little bit. And we could change the speed on that. So we could create timbral changes too that probably wouldn't occur to most people when they're messing with such a radical effect, but it could be a subtle thing as well. You see our width changes how long this takes. Now you'll notice that you hear it as timbral changes, but you hear it substantially when it goes through our fundamental. And so as you hear it go up through the fundamental, you hear that pitch bend. I can't think of a way right now to protect the fundamental from it. Maybe using like protection. Nope, still changing. But I'm sure there's a way you could figure out a neat way to do it. Maybe just layer it with another Harmor without it being, um, without one being phased, and just low pass it so it's just a fundamental. Like, there's all sorts of interesting options you have. If you didn't understand what any of that meant, then don't worry about it. But yeah, that is the phaser. Some really cool, very unique options that I've not seen in any other sense. And so that's kind of neat. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments, and have a blessed day.